Okay, so probably we need to clarify that our beneficiaries we're referring to in this case are the end users. And so far, looking at the responses, 50% is saying it's in the initiation phase, planning phase, 20%, implementation, 20%, closing, 10%. I would like to invite maybe, oh, that is changing now. Okay, so far we only have 13 responses. Maybe we just give it a bit more time so that we have more people to respond to this. Okay, so far the highest is 47% for the initiation phase. I'd just like to invite maybe one or two people who've answered to any of these to actually maybe tell us why they chose their option. You can just raise your hand. Anyone that says initiation phase, what are your reasons? Hello? Please feel free. If anyone selected maybe any other option, you can just raise your hand and mute and share your reasons. Okay. I can see JP, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. For me, I actually was stuck. I couldn't find the right response for me because I do think beneficiaries should be involved throughout at every single stage of a program, whether at the design, during implementation, and the closing. I was actually looking for a response of that sort, but didn't see it. Then I said, okay, maybe initiation. At least from a start, let's make sure they are involved. Over. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that response. Any other view? Maybe I can take one more. Okay.
Hello, Isa. Hello, everyone. Well, for me, just to echo what JP has just said, I believe that these initiatives are designed and are meant for the stakeholders. In this case, we're looking at the beneficiaries, and there is definitely much need for us to have the beneficiaries being involved right from the onset. So I ended up selecting the initiation phase. Thank you so much, Isa.
Okay, thank you so much for the responses. So I'm going to speak to monitoring and evaluation involvement and how it has shifted from having a focus on the funders to now focusing on the needs of the community and what role can monitoring and evaluation actually play. So what we see is that in the past, and maybe it's still happening, is that it has been common for interventions to base their development on what is perceived as a priority by the donors or maybe the funders, the other types of beneficiaries. And that might not actually reflect the actual realities of the needs of the actual beneficiaries on the ground. So we find that interventions will represent the donors, the developers, the implementers, and not really the end users. When the intervention is being developed by the donors and the funders,
Hi, Isabel, your network is breaking. Maybe you can just switch off your camera. Okay, I think Isabel's having some technical issues. So while she's still trying to get that sorted, I think we can then move to the next speaker, who's Stefan. Stefan, over to you. Stefan, are you on the call?
Yes. Hi, Tanya. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, attendees, and everybody present. So I'll just give a brief overview of how M&E, how is the shift creating space for discussion around inclusion and equity. So yeah, the ultimate goal of development and humanitarian interventions is to improve people's lives and livelihoods, to reduce poverty, inequality, or injustice over the long term, or through the immediate alleviation of suffering and vulnerability. Such interventions are therefore effectively based on the ability to include all affected persons in the programs, reaching those who are most marginalized or subject to discrimination or at risk. M&E is beneficial due to its inherent ability to measure effectiveness. It can ensure a project is more responsive to actual rather than assumed needs and promote the sustainability of results through stronger community ownership. The additional purpose of M&E is to strengthen the effectiveness of our interventions. Therefore, mainstreaming, equity, and inclusion is a primary concern for M&E practitioners. Tanya, can I just get confirmation that I am still audible and visible?
Yes, yes. Please
Okay,
continue.
thank you. So, what is inclusion? When we speak about inclusion, what do we actually mean? So, for the most part, inclusion is thought of as an approach to programming that actively consider disability or the impact of gender roles. We often see this articulated in program design as disability inclusive or gender inclusive approaches. This often unintentionally leads to overlooking other groups who are marginalized or at risk of being excluded from interventions. We could also miss other aspects of a person's identity that may further complicate their ability to fully benefit from our interventions. Inclusion recognizes that people have multiple and intersecting identities that impact whether or not they experience discrimination or exclusion, and to what extent. Mainstream inclusion means all groups, regardless of identity, are visible and meaningfully represented in our programming. It also means that we take steps to identify and reduce barriers to the representation. And I think this is fundamentally important within the broader scope of M&E, and specifically with the notion of Made in Africa evaluations that we're championing. But before I get into that, let's have a look at equity and specifically what do we mean when we refer to equity. So firstly, Inequity generally arises when certain population groups are unfairly deprived of basic resources that are available to other groups. A disparity is unfair or unjust when its cause is due to social context rather than biological factors. Gender discrimination and other social, political, and economic forces that systematically deny the rights of specific groups, such as girls, children of minority groups, or children with disabilities, are cause for grave concern from an equity perspective. Despite, despite equity being a universal concept, the cause and consequence of inequity vary across countries, cultures, and communities. Inequity is rooted in complex range of political, social, economic factors that include but by no means limit to gender discrimination, ethnic, linguistic, minority, and religious discrimination. Discrimination due to disability status, structural poverty, natural or man-made disasters, geographic isolation, cultural and social norms, and particularly in some instances, weak governance. So made in Africa, how can we bring equity and inclusion? And what is the main concept or driving factor behind the Made in Africa evaluation? So I think fundamentally, sorry. So I think fundamentally it's uprooting the deep-seated biases and coloniality that influence our worldview and landscape of the evaluand. And I think it's important that we draw the distinction between colonialism and coloniality, because coloniality is more the subtle or the 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 covert mechanisms which is transcribed in text or in what we digest on social media or our worldviews or our beliefs because we are living in a more globalized society. So it's important to understand what influence our decision making is and how we go about evaluations. Secondly, decolonizing the approach of our evaluation or commission takes center stage through considering the power dynamics that exist in the formative stages and practice of evaluation. So there's always power dynamics that are explicit or some instances not very much explicit. And we find these power dynamics exist when we go into certain communities or when there's cultural differences or basically or even differences in gender. So that can influence how evaluations are conducted or how information is conducted. Understanding the role and position of evaluators in relation to the context and scope of the target population can redress the inequalities and cultural sensitivities that often goes unspoken. Um, and then thirdly, appreciating the cultural and ethnic diverse communities that have contributions to make in redefining the evaluation, and particularly viewing beneficiaries, in this instance beneficiaries, um, as valued contributors instead of passive recipients of aid. And I think this is fundamentally important because in most instances, um, beneficiaries in the general sense or the traditional sense, they have more to offer than just being available for data collection or extracting information to a certain extent. So they can provide more direction in terms of what to look at or the design of certain interventions or what indicators should be included or can be included that both represents the, the beneficiaries in the traditional sense and the evaluators. I'm conscious of time, so I'll park there. And again, this was just a general overview. And thank you. Over to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And could I just request that when you join the meeting, please just mute your mics here. Some people. Okay, great. Thank you. And also, I encourage questions, feedback in the chat box. Please feel free to just add in your comments in the chat box and we'll get to them during the discussion session. I think now we should give time to our next speakers. So it's Maibongo and Yilkai, and they'll be discussing on recentering M&E for local audiences from a Clear Aid perspective. So over to you, Maibongo.
Thank you so much, and good morning and good afternoon and evening to everyone who's joining the call. So basically, the issue of recentering M&E for local audiences It's quite broad, and there are many ways in which different organizations are approaching it. My experience at Clear AA has actually taught me or revealed the innovative manner in which the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results approaches evaluation capacity development in English-speaking African countries. And so in this way, in the evaluation systems program of CLEAR, they take an approach that we basically go to different countries and working using a diagnostic tool that is called a MESA, Monitoring and Evaluation Systems Analysis Tool. You get to have an understanding of the particular country and the needs of that country with regards to monitoring and evaluation capacity development. So in this way, the countries themselves are at the very center of these interventions. That means in that process, you get to learn what their needs are. And when you learn what the needs of the particular country and context are, you then design an intervention that is calculated towards responding to those particular needs. So in this way, the process is both participatory and also country-led in all essential areas, to the extent that then when we start designing the M&E infrastructure or the necessary tools, whether it's your monitoring and evaluation policy or your monitoring and evaluation guidelines or agenda for the country in question, you find that the process itself is done through a co-creative approach where we as the center play more of a facilitative role in the design of these M&E tools or infrastructure, as it were. In this way, you get whether it's the leading institution, whether it's the leading ministry or the ministry that will actually lead with regards to M&E, depending on the institutional arrangements of that particular country. So you do not necessarily come in as the consultant who will just prescribe a way of handling monitoring and evaluation needs of a particular country by virtue of being technocrats in the field, but we work together and we draft the guidelines together, we draft the policies together and the implementation plans of those policies together with the relevant departments that are leading in terms of the institutional arrangements of that particular country. And this serves to assist with issues of ownership of the policy, ownership of the guidelines. And this also allows for the easy establishment and institutionalization of an evaluative culture and a culture of evidence use that speaks directly to the needs, to the local needs. Another one of CLEAR's programmatic approaches to evaluation capacity development is also through its research and learning program or business line, as it were, where, as my colleague Stefan mentioned, the issue of Made in Africa evaluations, for instance, where you find that through the research and learning program, the codification and documentation of experiences, and also the production of knowledge programs speaking to knowledge to Made in Africa, and also to facilitate that debate and keep it alive, and to convene different, whether it's different, it's different knowledge centers, and to provide that platform for sharing and knowledge brokering. The center, the research and learning program kind of facilitates this process. And so in this way, again, CLEAR is taking this approach again to capacity development. In this way, it's also approaching it from a different level, in which all the lessons that are learned, even from the evaluation systems business line, is consolidated, and knowledge products are actually published, they are developed, and there is proper knowledge management that is done. And you find with the research and learning program that it basically feeds off from all the other programs that the center runs. And Yokai I will hand over to Yokai, who will speak more to the rest of these approaches. Thank you. Over to you, Yokai.
Thank you so much, Maibongwe, for that. I'll just make two more additions regarding to the business lines that CLEAR runs. We've got the capacity strengthening, and the essence of this business line is just to assist the individuals and the organizations to have a more strengthened capacity to plan and to use and to manage M&E. And they run activities like curriculum development, capacity building, carrying out of training initiatives, and even evaluation initiatives. So CLEAR is recentering M&E for local audience through this business line by embarking on participatory approaches in their work. For instance, they developed the Kenya evaluation guidelines, and they did a train the trainer in Nairobi last year in November, and the business line was able to also accommodate the emerging evaluators in the training, and also allowing them to take a participative role, engage with government officials on how best to train on these evaluation guidelines. And they also focus on country-led development of individuals and organization capacities to conduct M&E themselves. As my colleague Maibongwe had already mentioned, that they try to capacitate and to make sure that evaluations in the countries are country-led, and they not only focus on external evaluators. Also, they carry out tracer studies, which have been the center's CLEAR's global initiatives approach to determine the effectiveness and usefulness of the entire global network, and also carrying out tailor-made training initiatives in countries like Lesotho, in Namibia. And this has been very crucial in making sure that M&E is not only focusing on external consultants coming through to do these evaluations, but we get our own local people getting involved, and then we also get a chance to involve our own local audiences. Another business line is also strengthening parliaments. This is the fourth business line that CLEAR is running, and it emphasizes on allowing and helping parliaments make better use of evidence and M&E processes, just to ensure evaluative culture for public representative officers. This is a participatory approach whereby evidence is seen to be at the heart of good governance, and parliamentarians rely on identifying problems and designing programs and testing their effectiveness when they develop their policies. And by doing so, they need to base that on evidence. And moreover, the public is relying on these government officials, and they also hold them accountable to any of the policies, their successes, and the failure thereof. So these are basically the business lines that Clear AA is initiating and is making sure that they are centering M&D for local audiences, and they are assisting the different government officials, the different institutions within the region. Thank you so much, and I'll take it over to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Yokai and Maibongi, for that insightful presentation. I think it's very interesting to hear the work that KA is doing. And I know it would be great if you have any studies or any reports that have been published, please do share them on the chat for others who are interested. I know I'm particularly interested in the tracer study to see how is that actually conducted and making sure that we keep M&E local and include all stakeholders. Thank you once again. And now I leave time to Connie and Samu, who speak on to strengthening evaluation, communication, and use through promotion of innovation and inclusion. And this is from a WFP's perspective. Over to you, Connie and Samu.
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody, depending on the where you are. And thank you for this. I'm just going to switch off my camera because my network is a bit unstable. And just as just as Yokai and Maibongo were speaking to the issues of evidence, I'm still also going to be following that, however, focusing on the strengthening of evaluation, communication and use, where we are promoting innovation and inclusion. So this is based on the WFP perspective, World Food Program Organization, within the Regional Bureau Experience, SNEE. So where the strengthening and evaluation and communication use for what is one of the goals or pillars within the WFP, where in the Southern Africa region of the evaluation strategy. So the establishment of evidence and analysis dissemination work stream within the Regional Bureau Johannesburg mostly aims to promote the use of evaluation in order to strengthen learning and provide evidence that can be used for decision making, program designs, as well as implementation. So there are products that are already in place, and speaking to that, the evidence products that we are currently sitting within WFP, in order for us to achieve that, we are actually within the WFP Regional Bureau. The team analyzes and summarizes evidence from past independent evaluations, and where we prepare summary reports that are actually shorter and easy, ready to access for decision makers or by decision makers. And then this is done using a well-developed framework. So in this framework, we've got two types of products that are of the summary evidence, where we summarizes the evaluation summary report summarizes the findings, the lessons, and the recommendations from individually completed evaluation reports, where we are summarizing them maybe into shorter summary, less than 10 pages. And then we have the country summary reports, which summarizes evidence from all WFP evaluations that were completed in a specific country. So the production of the country summary is aimed to inform the design of country strategic plans or programs. And as well as within the WFP, we are currently drafting country summaries to inform the design of the new strategic plans, which my other colleagues, the EEs, the emerging evaluators that are also involved in the process, drafting country summaries such as Malawi and then Zambia. We also have Madagascar, which also include Namibia. All these are country officers evaluation reports that we are summarizing. Not only that, we also have summaries, thematic summaries, which are also demand-driven evidence products that are produced within WFP evaluation function. So at the moment, we are currently drafting the Republic of Congo school feeding thematic summary as one of the examples that will be used to actually design the next Governor school feeding program in the Republic of Congo. So other evidence products includes maybe having graphics there, making PowerPoint presentation such as evaluation briefs and calendars, and maybe also developing one pages as well as blurbs. So there we are actually, that's how we are trying to promote use in within the WFP. Therefore, we are not also working alone. If through collaboration with other evaluations team. So the evaluation team collaborates with other WFP regional bureau teams. For example, the program unit, or it could be the evidence generation block and knowledge management teams, and country offices to actually identify their evidence needs. So this is helping in order to promote uptake of evaluation evidence and use. In the preparation of this evidence product goes through a thorough review by where the evaluation team and country office, as well as the regional bureau colleagues, for making quality assurance and also to make sure that the product is credible. They ensure that the evidence is presented and is a true reflection of what was represented in the evaluation report. So they go through that review. It's not only the evidence analysis team that works on the review, but also we include other evaluations teams or other teams within the regional bureau. So up to here, I'm just going to hand over to Samu Kelisiwe Mkhize to actually speak more on the dissemination and facilitation. Over to you, Samu.
Thank you, Connie. So I'm also having trouble with my bandwidth, but I will try to switch my camera off just to make sure that I don't lose connectivity. So as Connie mentioned at WFP, we've been focusing a lot through the evidence use analysis and dissemination work stream to promote evaluation, communication, and use. And there's been a shift to focusing on reporting findings primarily to WFP management and direct stakeholders or donors, to reporting widely and feeding back to beneficiaries and interested stakeholders within the different sectors and stakeholders that work with WFP, including governments. So there are various channels that are used to disseminate evaluation products, both internally and externally. Internally within WFP and externally with wider stakeholders, and this includes publishing products on WFP internal and external websites, WFP communities platforms, WFP SharePoint, Yama partner websites, knowledge sharing platforms, and also through traditional methods such as emails and meetings to promote access to these evaluation products. So there's a great need to ensure that evaluation evidence is presented though in the right format. As Connie mentioned, there are different ways in which the evaluation products are packaged to ensure that they're easily accessible at the right time by those that make decisions based off of this evaluation evidence and those that implement programs. So for effective communication and accessibility, there's a need to ensure that you maximize the use of evaluation results. So we need to think about how we can actively share lessons among a wide range of stakeholders, and including beneficiaries from vulnerable groups. And so there are questions that we ask at WFP when we think about how can we maximize use of evaluation results and thinking about our stakeholders. We think about the relevance in terms of what are we publishing, to whom are we publishing, so who is our audience that we're targeting with the different evaluation products and channels that we're using, and how can we achieve our goals, and what level are these stakeholders at? Are we talking to government? Are we talking to national governments? Are we talking to subnational governments? Are we talking to the beneficiaries at community level? So at which level are we speaking speaking to, and who are we speaking to at these different levels? And how can we ensure that our evaluation products are accessible to them? And when can we share these evaluation products? Is very important. The timing is linked to the usability of these evaluation products. When we disseminate, we need to think about the timing of these evaluation products, and why are we disseminating these evaluation products. So those questions are what leads our thinking behind the relevance of the dissemination approaches that we use. And we need to also think about, and we do think about, and we consider the use and audience appropriate communication strategies. So as I mentioned, there are different media platforms, and also the use of different languages to break language barrier for comprehension and understanding. So evaluation products are also translated to ensure that different different people or stakeholders that speak different languages are able to also understand and also comprehend what is actually in these different evaluation products. So that's another important consideration that we make. And so when we develop these dissemination approaches for different groups of users, it depends on also the information need to maximize the use of these evaluation products. So we are also thinking about things such as videos, podcasts, in addition to traditional reports that we disseminate to ensure accessibility and also to maximize use. But this also, we recognize it actually requires a high level facilitation. It requires constant communication and responsible person or unit to make sure that there is the right type of products that are available, and what type of platforms can we use. So as Connie mentioned, there is a lot of collaboration also with the communications as well as the knowledge management units within WFP, the regional bureau, to strengthen this facilitation of this process, to ensure that we're able to maximize use and communicate our evaluation products. And so another thing that we have been thinking as WFP regional bureau is how can then we add value to evaluation communication and use. And we've been thinking about creating and strengthening the culture for sharing and opening room for collaboration with other sectors and think tanks and civil society organizations, and sharing also with academic institutions these evaluation products, to just ensure that we actually maximize communication, and we actually include some of these important stakeholders within our dissemination approaches within WFP. And also, this is also going to assist in creating demand for evaluation evidence. And we're also thinking about building on evaluation evidence bases, thinking about creation of evidence maps and other knowledge creation approaches to as a value add into the work stream. And also thinking about also process use within the evaluation process itself, and not just thinking about the final follow-up and dissemination phase of these decentralized evaluations, but also thinking about engagements and in the engagement of stakeholders in the evaluation process, engagement of these sectors and civil society organizations in the and beneficiaries in the evaluation process, to enable us to learn and to think evaluatively with stakeholders. And this process occurs when those who are involved in the evaluation learn from the evaluation process itself and make changes and create dialogue based off of the evaluation process, rather than actually focusing mostly also on the findings. So policy dialogues are also dissemination approaches that take place while we are still kind of conducting the evaluation. They are process use dissemination approaches that actually strengthen the evaluation, but also open room for strengthening evidence generation. And it also strengthens dissemination and also use of evidence when stakeholders are involved in the evaluation process itself and are learning while the evaluation is taking place. It enables process use and also supplements dissemination of evaluation evidence. So that's what WFP has been doing and doing very well so far.
Thank you, Samu and Connie for that insightful presentation on how evidence is used and how evidence is communicated from a WFP's perspective. Yeah, we do really look forward to seeing those summary evidence, and please do share any links or where the audiences can be able to read some of the WFP evaluations, which include the summary evaluation reports. Thank you so much to our presenters on how they're keeping M&E local from their own perspective and experiences. I think now we've reached a time where if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and raise your questions. Yeah, any questions to the floor? Okay, while we're still waiting for any questions, I'll be reading some of the comments in the chat box. So we had one comment from Cananelo, and she said that beneficiaries should be involved at the initiation stage of the project because they form part of stakeholders. No, and we totally agree with that. And I noticed we also have Madeleine, who's joining us all the way from Ivory Coast, and she's new to the monitoring and evaluation field. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask our panel. Any questions? Yes, Samu, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tanya. I just saw responses to our poll question on what does the audience think in terms of what is the most critical consideration in strengthening evaluation, use, and communication. I am interested in the individual who mentioned innovation, if they could mention why they prioritized innovation within evidence use and communication, if they could just mention that.
Okay, thank you, Samu. And the poll is still open if you do want to participate. So the question is, what do you think is the most critical consideration in strengthening evaluation, use, and communication? And the options are equity, innovation, and inclusion. So far, we have 10 responses.
So while that person or anyone else that wants to come in, I just wanted to say, when we thought about this poll question, we also had our own discussion on, what is the most important or critical element in evidence use and communication. And there's always, the trade-off that needs to happen in some cases where we want to make sure that we're innovative, that we are able to develop innovative approaches to dissemination, but there's also the element of what do we do, what can we do for example, disabled stakeholders, what do we do for stakeholders that can't read the report, what ways can we include to make sure that they're also thought of when we are disseminating products. But also we think about the issue of inclusion, how can we include all stakeholders within evaluation communication? When do we include them? Do we include them when we're disseminating, or do we think about them when we are still conducting the evaluation in the inception? When we identify the stakeholders, do we just identify them, but do we also then try to also get their input into how we think about communication and knowledge at that point? Do we include them when we think about the terms of reference and what is important? We also talk about equity, how do we include everyone? Do we include everyone, And so those are some of the questions we were thinking about. And if anyone else wants to come in and just give us some insights on what they are thinking, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Samu. We have a question in the chat box, and this question is from Maibongwe. And she says that thank you for the great presentations. Wondering if the presenters can share their thoughts on any other innovative ways to disseminate evidence. So I think this is open to our presenters. So if you have any feedback to this question, please go ahead. Any other innovative ways to disseminate evidence? I'll throw this maybe at Maibonwe, who was one of our presenters.
Okay. No, thank you. I think the issue of maybe innovative ways to disseminate evidence, I think it has to do, especially my perspective is from the context. Understand the context first. Perhaps who are the users? Who do you want? Who are you expecting to use this evidence? Who is this for? And I think with that understanding, coming up with ways or innovative ways to disseminate the evidence becomes slightly easier, in the sense that if you are dealing with a community that has access to even technology, access to social media, those are some of the ways in which you could kind of re-engineer, that evidence in such a way that it's actually palatable to that kind of audience. But ultimately, for me, I think it starts with understanding the audience, understanding, who you want this evidence to reach, and then that determines, the way you do it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Maibonwe, for that response. We also have another question from Paelo, and I think I'll direct this question to Yelkai as she presented on Clear A's work. So the question is, how best can we maximize the involvement of stakeholders? I'm currently from Lesotho and currently working with Clear A in developing national M&E policy and evaluation guidelines. But stakeholders, non-state actors don't show up in the numbers as we would anticipate it. I think I'll throw this question over to Yelkai. Any thoughts on how to best maximize involvement of stakeholders?
Hi, thank you, Paolo. Thank you for this question. Speaking back to our poll question where we were asking beneficiaries, at what stage do we want them to be involved? I think the mere fact that we want to get them involved in the initial stages, right? This will also speak to when we disseminate information and when we can have them involved. So it's necessary to have them involved from the initial stages, so that we are able also to speak to them and get an understanding of their level of involvement and where they want to be involved. And so that we don't get to a point whereby at the end of an evaluation, we now look back and we say, maybe we should have involved them in 1, 2, 3. But then the fact that we would have had them involved in the initial stages, I think this then allows us to keep them involved throughout the process. That's my take on this. And also speaking to the last question, I believe now we are now a digital world, and dissemination of evidence, it's now a situation whereby we now need to look at globalization, and we now need to make sure that we put our evidence in the platforms whereby people are able to reach this information. The internet, now everyone has more access to internet. We've got WhatsApp platforms, we've got blogs, we've got places like LinkedIn, we've got Twitter. And I think these are ways that we can get to disseminate information as well to everyone. So I think that's my take on both these questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Caroline. I think we also have another comment from Fiona Johnson. She mentions that great session. How do we improve stakeholder inclusion at post-implementation evaluation that was not inclusive from the start? And I think I know Isabel did touch on this in the beginning. I think I'll hand over to Isabel just to answer the question.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. And I think that's really a good question. I think involvement on my part is something that has to border on ownership and it also borders on sustainability. So the other question maybe to that would be, how do you improve ownership? Because I think stakeholders would be ready to be involved post-implementation if there's that sense of ownership coming from them. And that also goes back to the reasons why they need to be involved right from the planning phase so that their interests are also taken note of over.
Thank you, Isabel, for that great answer. I know we had a hand up from Faith. Faith, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much. So thing is, I had a question on the use of evaluation or evaluation results by the stakeholders that were involved. And I think through answering these other questions by the panelists, I think they've also covered some things, some concerns that I had. So a brief background, most times evaluation reports and evaluation results are said to be used, but it's usually in the form of just dialogues and conversations. And within months, the conversation and the momentum dies down a bit. Ideally, when we do evaluations, we assume that maybe this can translate into maybe a policy change, a good output or outcome and the likes. But most times we just get the knowledge. We have dialogues with young people. We have dialogues with the key right holders, duty bearers, and within a few months' time, within a few weeks' time, the momentum dies down. And after that, we just come and place the information as lessons learned, maybe in the next report. So my question is, how can we be innovative that those evaluation results actually translate into results rather than them just translating into a dialogue or a conversation, and we assume that we've used the evaluations, because evaluation results and reports will continue to pile up, and we might end up continuing to create a square wheel. We assume that we're moving forward, and yet we're just on the same place. I think that's my question to the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Faith, for your questions. Any of the panel who want to tackle this question? Yes, Maibongwe Mncube.
No, thank you so much. And I think the challenge of ensuring, evaluation evidence use is one that I believe in the field we're all constantly trying to, improve on trying to actually increase ways of ensuring use. But one of the strategies, or maybe two, is the use of management responses and also implementation plans to accompany some of these evaluation reports has also been there's been also at least it would give the evaluation results or report some teeth, in the sense of how do you follow up and ensure that actually this evidence actually reaches decision makers, and you get a certain level of commitment or non-commitment, and the reasons why not within through the use of these tools, such as your management response and also your implementation plan on those recommendations that are accepted, how they will be implemented. It allows for a process in which we can then follow up as well on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maibong. We also have some few comments in the chat from Jean Providence, and he says that human minds are wired towards stories, something they can identify themselves with. Finding ways to storify evidence, bearing in mind the type of audience, is one of the ways to disseminate evidence, and I have to agree with that. And we also have another comment from Noma Tamsang, who says that stakeholder research is important in the IT environment. The user beneficiary research is a slowly developing activity. And we also have another comment from Maibon. We also says that the issue of public participation in policy development is an age-old challenge that requires us to be innovative in creating an interest at grassroots level from the start. This means translating the technical jargon of policies into everyday solutions to the challenges we face. Thank you for that comment. And finally, we have a comment from Evans who says that thanks to the presenters. Kindly do the panelists have any take on culturally indigenous responsive monitoring and evaluation? Thank you. So I think this is posed to the presenters. Do the panelists have any take on culturally or indigenously responsive monitoring and evaluation? Over to the panels. And finally, we have a comment also from Sihamu says maybe working with the local NGOs and the CS OS can help in increasing inclusion. I know there's a hand up from Samuel and Stefan. Over to you. I think these will be our concluding remarks. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. I think I can probably just touch on the comment that Evans mentioned with regard to cultural and indigenously responsive monitoring and evaluation. I'm a fairly simplistic person when it comes to these type of approaches to monitoring, and specifically in line with inclusion. I think it's important to get as much involvement from the community members that we are working with, specifically not viewing them as mere beneficiaries of certain programs or interventions, but rather as knowledgeable contributors towards the development of setting indicators. And specifically, when we set indicators, it shouldn't be something that happens in isolation without the involvement of the beneficiary group, so to say. So the notion of collaborating and agreeing on with beneficiaries, and I'm kind of opposed to this word of using beneficiaries. I like to think of more as contributors. Is to kind of co-develop indicators and agree on indicators that serves both needs, because I think ultimately one of the I would say one of the privileges or one of the responsibilities of evaluators are deciding and determining what progress looks like. And these are often tied into what we are measuring and what indicators we're setting along the lines, or in terms of what progress will look like at the end of the intervention. So having the input of the local communities in terms of what do they deem as progress, what do they deem as actually constructive or actually enhancing their livelihoods, or what is actually meaningful. Because as I mentioned and as I alluded to, ultimately the evaluators has a lot of influence in determining what progress looks like. So co-developing indicators is one component that could move that a bit more favorable in terms of joining what outcomes would look like and what would serve the needs of the target population. And yeah, I think I'll park there for now. And I'll hand over to Samuel. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I fully agree with everything that Stefan mentioned. So an important element when we think about culturally responsive monitoring and evaluation. Specifically, I think Stefan spoke a lot to indicators, which speaks to both monitoring and evaluation, but mostly to monitoring. And when we think about evaluation and thinking initially about also those evaluability assessments, both in principle and both in practice, is that when we think about project designs and we think about indicators, we really need to think, as you mentioned, what does success look like to communities, but also what is happening in context. And so there are indicators that are culturally or community based that need to also fit into the project design. And we need to make sure that those are included within the overall theory of change. They are the monitoring, the M&E frameworks also need to include those indicators. And if there's a need to build capacity in terms of now the data collection methods, of collecting those information on those indicators, we need to provide that support to communities. We need to ensure that we think widely about culturally responsive monitoring and evaluation, building in the elements of capacity building, because we need to think from the beginning. You need to think when you're still thinking about availability assessments, not just to say there was no data in maybe in a community-based initiative because where we were developing data collection methods or indicators that we couldn't collect data on those types of interventions, because maybe some of the ways in which the communities are implementing, or sometimes the types of indicators that they have, there are no data collection methods that are attached to those, because we didn't think about those indicators. We didn't think about success in that way. So we really need to say, when you think about an intervention, what is kind of the context in which this intervention is implemented? Who are the critical implementers in these interventions? If it is community members, we need to then think, okay, in this context, how are these programs being implemented, and what does success look like? And then what types of ways that are culturally responsive or locally relevant can we collect information regularly that is also valid on a continuous basis, that is not that is to show validity and reliability of these methods, and we need to support them in that, and not always in a way try to assign our own indicators and our own data collection methods, because it then becomes kind of just a data collection process that does not enable learning, and there's a need to embed learning within that process. That's what I kind of think about when I think about responsive payment.
Thank you so much, Samo. I think now, thank you to everyone who has stayed. I know we are over time, but this has been such an engaging session. So many people commenting and giving in their thoughts. I think finally we'll just hand over time to Isabel to just provide us with a brief summary. Over to you, Isabel.
Okay, thank you so much, Tanya. Thanks, everyone. Indeed, it has been a very insightful discussion, and really we can actually see that monitoring and evaluation plays an integral part in the project cycle that should contribute to the improvement of projects, to learning and accountability to multiple stakeholders, but most especially to the beneficiaries. I think moving forward, it's now up to us to actually keep finding innovative ways of how stakeholder analysis can be improved to a point that even beneficiaries' voices are actually heard from the planning phase, a case where beneficiaries themselves can actually identify the priority needs of their communities. And also another key thing is that the involvement of all the stakeholders is key to enhancing ownership and also sustainability beyond donor assistance. Thank you so much, everyone. Over to you, Tanya.
And I'd like to thank our panels, speakers, and all those who have engaged via the chat. I mean, it's been an insightful discussion, and I would just like to ask if we could all just put on our camera just so that we can take a group photo before the session ends. Please just turn on your cameras. Thank you. Thank you. I see you, Timba. Please don't be shy. I know some are unable to actually turn on their camera, but I really appreciate those who managed to. I'm just taking one more photo. If we can all say, if we can all say cheese. Okay, here we go in 3, 2, 1. thank you all for participating, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day. And please do catch up with all the rest of the G Local sessions that are still happening today. Thank you for joining. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.